You sleep with the window cracked, thinking the house is full of harmless noises. A name called, from the dark your nickname, spoken like someone who knows where you hide. Footsteps in a fogged-up parking lot. A phone that rings from an empty desk. A soaked stranger pauses in your doorway and smiles like he owns the night. These are not movie scares. They are real, silent strategies, strangers testing doors, voices mapping your house, predators rehearsing the moment they step inside. Stay alert. Midnight Visitor. Brandon was 16. He didn't even remember what month it was, but he knew this was sometime during the summer. His parents were gone for the weekend, so he was spending the 2 days alone, doing whatever. Mostly cycling between watching YouTube, gaming, and grabbing snacks from the kitchen. He was in his room upstairs 99 of the time, with headphones on. Being a teen, it felt nice to just sit in his room and do whatever he wanted without being bothered. At some point while he was gaming though, he started hearing voices. At first, he thought a video had started playing in the background, but when he checked YouTube, everything was paused. So then he took his headphones off, and that's when he noticed the voices were coming from outside. He had his bedroom window slightly cracked open so he could hear just the muffled sound of someone speaking. It was raining outside too, which made it more difficult. They had to be close though, like near the outside walls of the house. He couldn't tell what they were saying or if they were talking to someone else. He only heard what sounded like one voice. By the time he had gotten up from his chair and walked over to the window to get a closer listen, they had stopped talking. Brandon decided to head downstairs and try looking out some of the other windows to see if they were still around, because honestly, someone walking that close to the house at 8 p.m. was pretty weird. Seemed like whoever it was gone already though, because he couldn't see any sign of them when he got downstairs. He took the opportunity to grab a bag of chips from the kitchen, then headed back up to his room. He must have been up there gaming for an hour, but it went by really fast. He was in the middle of a round and suddenly heard a voice from outside his headset. Even mid-game and with the headphones on, the voice was much more clear than what he was hearing earlier. Not necessarily louder, but far less muffled, and he could have sworn he knew what the man said. Brandon quickly took off his headset and listened. The house was quiet and creaky as he waited for 15 seconds before he heard the voice again. The man called his nickname. His full name was Brandon, but he always went by Bran with his buddies, and that's what the man was calling out. He didn't recognize his voice though, and more importantly, he was almost positive it was coming from below him, like inside the house. Brandon quietly laid his headset on the desk, got up and walked to the bedroom door. He did his best to open it very quietly, not to let it creak or make any noise. Just when he opened it, the man called his name again, though yelled wasn't the right word. He was calling it out, but almost softly. It was like when you call out someone's name just to ask them something. Very calm and friendly. In the context of whoever this man was breaking into his home, it only added to how disturbing the whole thing was. His voice had this gravelly sound to it, like he had to be mid-50s with a life full of smoking. As he said Brandon's name again, the boy was able to confirm that the man was definitely inside the house and probably right around the bottom of the staircase. Brandon backed up and left the door open, scared to close it and make noise with him being so close. He then went to the back window and pushed it further open, then carefully stepped out onto the roof and closed it as much as he could without letting it latch shut. It wasn't a full roof. It was actually the overhang to the front porch, and it just happened to be right outside his window, making a kind of 3 or 4 foot wide sloped ledge that he could stand or sit on. Definitely not the safest, especially being wet and slippery from the rain, but he didn't have much of a choice unless he wanted to hide in the bedroom and probably get found before cops could make it. And that's when he realized he had messed up. He left his phone on his desk. He was too worried about getting out to even think about it. Brandon moved back toward the window and prepared to go back in and get it. But just as he peered into the room, he saw a shadow through the doorway, coming down the hall outside his room. He quickly moved back out of sight. His heart was pounding. A few seconds later, he heard some things shuffling around in his room, and then the man called his name again. Bran. That creepy, soft tone. Brandon peered over just a little bit so he could partially see the room. All he saw was the man's shadow on the wall, moving around and looking at his desk, probably seeing he had a game opened, and was in the process of figuring out he had to be somewhere nearby still. Brandon really wanted to look around a little further to get a glimpse of who he was, but he couldn't risk getting caught. He started getting that sixth sense gut feeling that he was about to be found out, so he acted fast, moving to the farthest point of the ledge. Under him was nothing but a small bush and some grass. It was maybe an 8 to 10 foot drop. He sort of dangled off first, then let go, hitting his legs on the ground and falling back. It was painful, but didn't break anything. Brandon got up and ran for the nearest neighbor. Honestly, he didn't know how others in these stories he listened to did it, because in his case, he couldn't get anyone to answer the door and help him. It was the middle of the night, and they probably thought he was some lunatic trying to get them to open the door and let him in. It still ended up working, though, because one of the houses called the police on him for banging on their door, which he was then able to explain to the officer. He had no way to know how long he was out there for. His guess was 20 minutes before the cop came by. The man in his home was gone, but the officer also found the window in his room fully open. The guy had checked out on the ledge at some point after Brandon left. It made his heart sink, knowing how close he was. In the following days, his legs swelled up from the jump, but ultimately he had no lasting injuries. Crazy to think that decision actually might have saved his life, or prevented whatever sick plans that intruder had in mind. Brandon thought it would always haunt the back of his mind, knowing he was so close to seeing who the man was. And yet he didn't. He kind of wished he had risked it and looked, but it was easy for him to say now while not actively in a life-threatening situation. As far as he and his family were aware, the guy never came back and never followed up on anything. He was much older now, so he didn't think anything would ever come from it, and hopefully it stayed that way. Night shift intruder. Marcus worked as security for a small office space in town. Even after this happened, he still decided to keep the job, as he couldn't find anything else with better pay. He told himself he'd be leaving as soon as he could, though. Part of the reason he got the job and didn't mind it was that the office space was part of a large business district, or office park, in the middle of a fairly wealthy part of town. Really, he couldn't see any way people would actually try breaking into one of these places, as they had to know in a wealthier area like this, there would be security, if not in person, at least through cameras and monitoring systems. He clocked in at 10 p.m. doing his first quick rounds of the place to activate all the detection systems, then headed into the security office. It was more of a closet, to be honest. No windows or anything, so not a fun place to be. If he could help it, he'd like to walk around pretty often. Marcus was only supposed to get up and walk around every hour, including a perimeter walk of the building, but he did it more frequently because watching the cameras and systems was really a drag. However, that night, it was pouring down a little too hard to be walking around outside, so he was stuck inside, walking the hallways. One thing to mention was that the cameras always fogged up every time it rained, which made all the outdoor ones nearly useless. Just 30 minutes into his shift, there was an alert on the monitor. It detected motion from one of the cameras on the front of the building. He checked it and could barely see anything, though it did look like there might have been someone standing outside the front door. He could just see a little bit of movement. So, Marcus headed out of the office and down to the first story. All he was going to do was go out there and see what the guy wanted, or if there even was a guy there. But when he opened the door and looked out, the man wasn't there. Still just a rainy mess outside, and no one in sight. He closed the door and reset the alarm. Very strange for anyone to be out there that night. Maybe the man had the wrong building. Regardless, it looked like he left, so Marcus tried not to bother with it. He went back up to the office. He was only sitting down for another 5-ish minutes before he heard a phone ringing. Not the security phone on his desk. It sounded like it was coming from a floor below in one of the offices. Annoyed, Marcus got up and walked down there, but by then, it had already rung through. He waited a few minutes, and almost like he predicted it, they called again. He followed the sound into a seemingly typical office room. Bunch of desks lined up in rows with the main overhead lights off. But right in the middle, there was a small glowing light from a phone on one of the desks. He walked up to it. It said, "Unknown caller." He found it extremely odd that a random phone on one of the office desks was ringing. Why this specific one, and not the reception desk phone that was linked to the company? How did anyone even have this specific office phone number and extension? He wanted to answer and ask who was calling. The mystery of it was hard to ignore, but it wasn't his business to be answering random phone calls. Probably could have gotten in trouble for it if someone found out he did. So he left it. He didn't know how to put the thing on silent, so for the next hour, he'd constantly hear the damn thing ringing below him as he sat upstairs in the security room. At 1 p.m., Marcus got up and did a quick walk through the office. Just the usual rounds. It only took 10 minutes, and then he was back at the security desk. But he didn't even get to sit down when he heard a thump resonate through the building. It echoed, like it was from the hollow stairwell or possibly a hallway. Scared the hell out of him. He checked the system and saw nothing interesting. So then he ran down to the first floor to recheck the doors that he just checked. He felt a bit of shock as he approached the front door and noticed a blinking green light on the alarm system. It was put on pause, basically disarming this specific door. Even he never did that. He only turned it on or off, never on pause. Feeling a bit of tension, Marcus pushed open the door and looked outside. Still pouring and still nobody out there. He closed and relocked the door. Something really strange was going on this night, and it was the first time since getting this gig that he'd actually been uneasy. He had no idea what was going on. He started to hurry back up the stairwell, hoping if he looked over the system again, and it would give him some sort of answers. He got to the 3rd story when he stopped right on the stairs. The door was open, the one leading to the 3rd floor office hallway, which was also where the phone had been ringing from earlier. He carefully stepped up to it, not hearing a single thing as he approached and looked out into the hallway. And then, everything went black. His sight, hearing, probably whole consciousness, just cut out for a split second. When he was back, he was completely dazed and in the middle of stumbling backward, and even though he blacked out for a moment, Marcus knew instantly that he'd been hit in the back of the head. As his whole body was fighting to stay awake, he fell down a few steps in the stairwell and saw the blurry outline of someone standing in the doorway. He immediately got to his feet and stumbled down the rest of the steps, ears ringing and head throbbing as he managed to make it out of the building. He used the work phone on his belt to quick dial 911. Marcus hid behind his car in the downpour as he waited for them to get there. He was so out of it, he couldn't tell how long he waited for. They didn't find anyone in the building. He was taken to the hospital and treated for a pretty bad concussion, but was otherwise okay. While it might seem like just a regular break-in, a lot of things added up to make it feel more professional, he guessed. They did it on a rainy night when the camera lenses were fogged over, and assuming it was them calling, they knew a specific office worker's phone number that wasn't available to the public. And most convincing was that they knew how that exact security system worked and how to disengage it so they could get in unnoticed. It seemed too coincidental to be some nobody breaking in on a whim. The guy hit him so hard, Marcus couldn't even make out anything but a blurry image of him, so he had no description to give the police. All this being said, Marcus knew he wouldn't be getting any answers. He'd still been working there months after this happened, and the company hadn't told him anything. Nothing about if anything was stolen, or if they knew who it was, or even what he broke in for. Nothing at all. It was really odd, and Marcus was still in the process of looking for a new gig, but until then, he was going to be way more aware of any strange things going on at this office. The Hooded Stranger. A few months ago, Josh and his buddy Thomas were hanging out at his place for the evening. Neither of them worked the next day, so they were just chilling and having some beers. Honestly, they weren't planning to hang out for that long, but by the time it was 10 p.m., Josh offered Thomas to sleep on the couch if he wanted, which was actually a pretty common occurrence. Thomas still lived with his folks, so hanging at Josh's place was his way of getting some space. They made plans for tomorrow morning as well, and the whole thing turned into planning to have a pretty cool day. But since Thomas didn't bring any extra clothes or anything, and before he drank too much, he drove back to his place real quick to grab some stuff. That way, they could drink some more when he got back, and he'd have stuff for tomorrow. Obviously, Thomas could have stayed home since he was going back anyway, but like Josh knew he preferred hanging at his place. The drive was only 5 minutes, so Josh just hung back and waited. He was going to stay out on the porch, but somehow he hadn't noticed the massive storm going on outside, so he went back in and waited on the couch. Josh was scrolling on his phone and sipping on his beer, not really watching the time. But at some point, say 15 or 20 minutes later, a knock finally came at the front door. He quickly got up and casually opened the door, expecting Thomas, but nearly dropped his glass when he was startled by it not being Thomas. It was just some guy, wearing almost all black and dripping wet. The man looked disturbingly creepy. Even with alcohol in his system, there was no chance Josh would have ever opened the door for him had he known. Normally, he would have checked first too if he hadn't been expecting Thomas. And with the crazy storm out, what was this guy even doing? Before Josh could get a word out, the man put one foot in the doorway and looked in at him. He had clearly been out in the rain for hours, though he wore a tired look across his face. Josh reached back for the door and said, sorry, that he thought the man was someone else. The stranger kept his foot in the doorway, smiling. Josh started to close the door, and the man still didn't get the hint, keeping his foot right there. It was incredibly weird and awkward too, because for a good 4 or 5 seconds, they just stood there. The man said nothing, and Josh, too drunk to think of anything to say, froze in place. Finally, the stranger moved his foot and stepped back, still smiling, as Josh closed the door. Immediately, Josh went back to the couch and sent Thomas a text to watch out for the creep lurking outside the door. Honestly, it was more of a joke text. After shutting the door, he thought the whole thing was so ridiculous that it was kind of funny. Maybe he had a few too many drinks. He waited a decent amount of time, definitely longer than it should have taken Thomas to be back. Josh assumed the storm was slowing Thomas down, but when he went to the window and looked out, he saw Thomas' car parked on the curb. Confused, Josh went to the front door and opened it, but Thomas wasn't there. He stood in the doorway looking out into the rain, but it was clear Thomas wasn't around. The car was parked and off with no movement inside. Josh pulled out his phone and called Thomas' cell. Right away, a light lit up in the car. It was certainly Thomas' phone, and it lit up enough for Josh to see clearly that Thomas wasn't inside. Now he was worried. He walked out into the rain to the bottom of the driveway and looked around. He called out Thomas' name, but the storm drowned out his voice. And then it hit him. The creepy man from earlier might have had something to do with this. A sinking, overwhelming feeling hit Josh's stomach. He ran back inside, closing and locking the door. As he took his shoes off, he quickly felt something else was wrong. The main hallway was dark, completely dark, as if none of the lights were on. Josh could have sworn he left them on, or at least a couple of them. He slowly walked down to the end of the hallway. The storm outside made the quiet inside the house unbearably tense. When Josh reached the end, he looked around. All the rooms were dark, but along the side of the wall, the faintest outline of someone was standing there, pressed up against the wall as if trying to stay out of sight. He must have stared too long, because after a few seconds, the man moved with confidence and stepped toward him. His arm was raised, holding something in his hand. Josh didn't stop long enough to see what it was. He bolted. Using every ounce of strength, Josh sprinted out the front door into the storm and away from the house. He ducked into the front porch of a random home and called the police. From there, he could barely see through the downpour to his house. Minutes later, 2 officers arrived. Josh watched them calmly walk up to the door before suddenly raising their guns and sprinting inside. Apparently, they had seen the intruder still in the hallway. The man ran out the back, jumped the fence, and disappeared into the storm. Josh ran over and told them everything, and the officers immediately began searching for Thomas. Thankfully, they found him after only 5 minutes locked inside a car down the road, tied up. It turned out the man had held Thomas at gunpoint as soon as he pulled up. After forcing him into the car, he broke in through the back while Josh was distracted, presumably planning to do the same thing to him. Which meant that when Josh had seen the man's arm raised, it was a gun pointed right at him. Had it not been too dark and had Josh realized, he probably wouldn't have risked running away. That could have left both him and Thomas at the mercy of this man. The car the intruder used was stolen earlier that night, so it was a dead end and he vanished into the storm without a trace. No one ever figured out who he was or why he did it.